Hello and welcome to episode 5, season 4 of Radio Dayz The Podcast. Very excited about today's program as we're doing something just a little bit different. Well, actually quite a bit different. Today's episode is a playback interview from the Bev Johnson Program that was conducted on the legendary Memphis radio station, WDIA. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked to be a guest on the Bev Johnson Show on WDIA in Memphis to talk about my new documentary series, as well as WDIA's role in this documentary. But before we jump into that, I want to let you know that you can hear this podcast on Buzzsprout, as well as all the major podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts. You can also watch this podcast via YouTube, as well as at ronrobinsonstudios.com. Radio Dayz The Podcast is sponsored by Radio Dayz 101 Years of Radio, a new documentary series about the history of terrestrial radio. You tune in and you're going to hear the story from those who lived it. Dick Burton, Bobby O.J., Duke Fakura, Greg Russell, Ken Calvert, Jill Forsythe, just a few of the scores of radio personalities and historians who appear in this docuseries. You can watch the entire 5-part series on the streaming service Reveal and Tubi, or on Vimeo. You can find the link for the Vimeo and more information on this docuseries on my website, ronrobinsonstudios.com. So as you may or may not know, WDIA in Memphis was the first black formatted radio station. In fact, WDIA in Memphis was the home to this country's first black radio disc jockey, Nat D Williams. So to talk more about WDIA's role in radio's storied history, as well as to discuss the rest of the docuseries, Tennessee Radio Hall of Famer Bev Johnson, originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan, I should add. She had me on her show last week on WDIA, so without further ado, here it is how it aired on WDIA in Memphis. Here, check it out.
Good morning, and welcome in to WDIA, the Bev Johnson Show. It is indeed a pleasure to have you with us once again on this Thursday. It's a rainy Thursday in Memphis, Tennessee. Get ready to put your ears on. I'm going to talk a little radio. What? Yeah, just think about that for a moment. I'm going to talk about some radio, very special guest. As always, when we're talking, when it's your turn to talk, you know you can. All you need to do is dial this number, 833-535-9342, 833-535-9342. We'll get you in to me. Welcome into the show. As I said earlier, we're going to talk radio, and I'm excited to talk to this young man. Yeah, I'll call him a young man. We are going all the way to the Motor City. Y'all know I love the Motor City, Detroit. Not far from my little hometown, Ann Arbor, Michigan. But we're going to Motor City to talk to my friend, and please welcome in for the first time on the Bev Johnson Show in WDIA, Mr. Ron Robinson. Good morning, Ron. How are you?
Good morning, Bev. I have to start by saying, first off, it's an honor to be on your program, but it's an even bigger honor just to be on the airways at a station like WDIA in Memphis. It's legendary, as your listeners know, but I am just giddy with excitement because being on this station is not lost on me.
Well, you know what? I thank you, Ron, and we're going to talk about how I know Ron, but this is such a pleasure for me, and I'm excited. But before we talk about this project and radio, Ron, tell our listeners a little bit about Ron Robinson.
Well, much like you, I've been a longtime fan of the medium of radio, and I made a career in the radio broadcasting industry, and it's just been the joy of my life to work, behind a mic in different radio stations, and so that's my trade is being a radio broadcaster. But I'm also in 2010. I was actually at a station in Fort Smith, Arkansas, being a Detroit kid, which was quite a way from home for me.
Yeah.
It was my last full-time job in radio. Was at a station called KMAG. I left the broadcast industry in 2010, and I started a video production company, photography company, and I, in addition to making videos to promote businesses, I also started making documentary movies, and which is how you and I crossed paths, because Bev Johnson, you were great to sit down with me for this thing we're about to talk about. But yeah, my career's in radio broadcasting, and I just love the medium. That's radio. You know as well as I do. Once you're in radio, it's a part of you.
It isn't it, Ron? I think about that, and I was just telling my best friend last night. I said, I can't believe, Ron, that I've been doing this for 48 years.
Wow.
Ron, 48 years.
That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. You're an icon.
And I think about it. I said, I didn't want to do this, but you never know what the Lord has for you. But being in radio for 48 years and being Ron at this legendary station for 41 of those 48 years.
Yes. I mean, somebody needs to do a show about that, Bev.
Well, maybe you'll do it, Ron.
I'm telling you, I'm up for the task. I mean, there's a lot of history there. And so I'm very excited to be on the program, and thank you for having me today.
You are so quite welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, Ron, as he said, he makes documentaries. Well, he has made one, and it is called Radio Dayz, 101 Years of Radio.
Yeah.
And I want to start by asking you, Ron, why did you decide to do this project?
Well, it started out, Bev, as kind of the initial idea was to do a documentary about why the rock and roll and the radio DJ weren't as big celebrities. I mean, you are, but as a rule, the shine, if you will, went off on radio DJs. But when I was growing up, the people on the radio locally were just as big, if not bigger, than the artists they were playing as far as music. They were just huge celebrities, especially in a town like Detroit. Radio was king in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with Motown and moving forward. But it stemmed, and then I just started talking to more and more people, and it just became bigger than that. It became the history of radio from its inception right after World War I, 1920, I believe, was the first commercial radio broadcast that was given a license. And then all the way through current day. And I interviewed over 40 radio personalities, including yourself and the late, great Bobby O'Jay, who I'm sure people still remember. We're coming up on a year past him passing away. Both of you sat down with me and told not only your story, but the story of radio. And Memphis is a huge part of that. Memphis, Arkansas, Mississippi, that that tri-state area, so important when radio started playing music as a rule and getting away from programming when TV was invented. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, that's how it kind of it led to another thing, and then it became too big for a movie. So it's actually a 5-part miniseries, each episode just under an hour. So it just became too much for even a documentary movie to highlight the highlights of radio from its inception to 1920, because 100 plus years radio's been a big thing in this country.
Yes, it has. And when you said that, Ron, going back to radio personalities back in the day, they were larger than life. You're absolutely correct, bigger than some of the artists that were out there. And I can remember, Ron, just listening and being in Ann Arbor and Memphis too, but being in Ann Arbor and listening to the stations in Detroit, WJLB and Inkster, WCHB, and listening CKLW. Oh my goodness,
the Motor City, yeah.
and those personalities, people love them. They love them.
Yeah.
I couldn't wait to see and meet. I don't know if you, Ron, Robin Seymour. Does that name
Yes,
ring a bell?
Robin Seymour, Bobbin with the Robin. It goes back to CKL, even before CKLW. The Big 13 over here. Well, The jocks were legendary, and it was a great. I contend that the '60s, maybe the '70s, were the golden era of radio. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree with you on that. So you're talking, Ron, of this document, Radio Days, 101 years of radio.
Yeah.
Why the 101?
Well, to be honest with you, I was just starting I was finishing up interviewing people when COVID hit. And as you know, that really put me behind the eight ball as far as anybody sitting down with me to talk. And we were all locked down. And it started out at 100 years in radio, but it just kind of, and realistically now we're at 103. Because it took longer. It took me literally 3 years to edit all the content that I had accumulated from all the different radio personalities / historians that I sat down with. So it took me a long time, and I just, 101, it kind of stuck because there's a famous radio station here in Detroit, 101 WRIF, which is legendary in Detroit. And there's a lot of legendary radio stations in Detroit, but that kind of like, well, I can't go to 102. But it actually, the original was 100 years of radio. And I went to 101, and I'm like, I'm not going to keep changing it depending on how long it takes me to finally edit this. But so I settled on 101, and my wife teases me because if you look at this will be my fourth documentary. All my documentaries have extremely long titles, so I didn't want to disappoint. Radio Days, and by the way, that's with a Z, DAYZ, 101 years of radio. I didn't want to rip off of because there's a Radio Days by a legendary filmmaker that was. Anyway, I digress. But so that's why I settled on 101. Yeah.
And one of the things that you say, Ron, you started this project because to pose the question, what happened to the radio DJ?
Right. Yeah. That's true. And
you asked that question, and I'm thinking, Ron, what happened to the radio DJ? We still have some, but it's different now.
I think a lot of that stems, Bev, is from the fact that there's more choices now. I mean, when we were growing up, there was a television and there was a radio. That was pretty much. We had cassette tapes and records, but it wasn't like it was. But because there's so many choices now, I think the shine has gone away. That, and combined with the fact that, we live in an internet world, and, there's lots of things that can grab our attention at any given time. And I think that has a lot to do with it.
When you were interviewing these personalities, these DJs, what did you learn a lot about, the different ones? And as you said earlier, I had the pleasure to sit down with you and Bobby O.J. I remember you met us over at the Rock and Soul Museum.
Yeah. Well,
that was nice.
I want to start. That's a great point, because I want to start what led me to Memphis, because, being a filmmaker in Detroit, I was talking to a historian, and they were talking about, because the movie starts in 1920. And I talk about the radio serials that were popular. I mean, people can't fathom that now, but the TV shows you watch on TV, those were all on the radio before TV. So you had the Lone Ranger and, the Green Hornet, the Jack Benny Show, and all these radio serials that were programs. Well, when TV came along, they all went to TV. So radio was like, okay, what are we going to do? And they said, and I think somebody said, I don't know, we'll just play records and figure it out later. And that's kind of what happened. And a lot of that early music was rooted in the blues, and that all started, like I said, in the tri-state area of Arkansas, of Mississippi, and of course Tennessee. So I couldn't. And look, there's stories all around the country that I could have highlighted, but I wouldn't have felt good about making something so important about when music actually started becoming the norm on radio airwaves. The music started with the blues, and it started, for all intents and purposes, there in Tennessee at WDIA, especially for black radio.
Yes. And as we know, WDIA. I am so proud to be a part of this station because it was legendary, and people listened. As you said, Ron, Arkansas. We went to Arkansas, Tennessee, Boot Hill, Missouri, Mississippi. People listen, and they're still listening.
Yes.
And now they can listen across the country.
Yes. Well, and I'm sure your listeners know, but the first black radio DJ was at WDIA. And of course, what really led me to Memphis was Rufus Thomas's story. I mean, also another, person who worked over the air at WDIA. There's just so much history in Memphis, and that's what led me to you and Bobby, and you guys are, especially the first couple episodes, are so instrumental in kind of telling that story. Yeah.
And I recall, Ron, when you're talking about Memphis and you asked the question, I think you asked the question to me and Bobby. You asked what was the music like between the Stax and the Motown.
Yeah, yes.
And I love that question for you because, growing up in Ann Arbor, I was a Motown girl, and then born in Memphis and coming to Memphis in the summer, I was a Stax girl. And you asked us, you said, what was the difference? And I keep remembering, and I said to you, Ron, I said that Stax had that boom,
that funk, yeah.
I mean, they had the funk, the funk,
right?
But Motown was kind of the smooth,
yes.
It felt,
yes,
yeah.
I agree. I mean, Stax music was much more gritty, more in your face.
Yeah.
And you could make an argument for some of the early Motowns had a little bit of flavor to it, but once Gordie Howe said, "Hey, I need to make something for the masses," and for the white folks in suburbia. And that's kind of how he ended up with the Motown. But yeah, Stax is much grittier, much in your face, and like you said, it's got that funk, and you gotta drag that that funk.
Oh yeah, right. You're right. Also, in the documentary, Radio Days, 101 Years of Radio, you talk to a lot of DJs. Yeah. Tell us some of the folks that you talked to that's in this documentary.
Well, obviously I mentioned yourself and Bobby O.J., who your listeners will be very familiar with, but, a lot of them were in Detroit. I think I went to Arizona to interview somebody, but yeah, most of them were prominently DJ radio personalities in Detroit, legendary Hall of Famers like Dick Burton, and Ken Calvert, who was a big name in Detroit, and any basketball fans, he used to be the public address announcer for the Bad Boy Pistons back in the day. You know what? I will tell you this. One of the highlights of all the folks I got to sit down with Duke Fakur from the Four Tops. That was unbelievable. Oh,
yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
Did
so,
you?
yes. And that was a thrill because, I had kind of, when we were talking, I told you about my admiration and my love for David Ruffin. And although he's no longer around,
I told you my story of David Ruffin too.
Yeah, you have a couple good ones. But sitting down with Duke Fakur of the Four Tops, because that was more than a radio personality. That guy, he's forgotten more about music than most people know. But yeah, it was such a thrill to sit down with him, and some of the old timers. JoJo Shuddy McGregor worked at CKLW. There was quite a few that I had to check myself at the door not to become a fanboy, if you will, just because I respected so many of these people for so many different reasons. But Duke Fakur was probably the coolest thing that I got to do as far as.
So Ron, what kind of, if you can remember, what kind of stories, and you all do Fakur, he's the last living Four Tops, original of the Four Tops.
Yeah.
What kind of stories did he tell you? Do you remember?
Well, I had to ask him about the David Ruffin, as I did you. But he was telling me stories about how the Four Tops and the Temptations would go on tour together. And, he told me, he didn't go too much into the treasure chest of stories, but he told me enough to get me. Yeah. But he just told stories about touring with the Temptations, how the Four Tops came to Motown late, even though they were from Detroit. They had a couple record labels before Motown, and he talked about. Oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed. I can't think of her name.
That's okay.
anyway, but yeah, no, he told some stories about Motown and the Funk Brothers, which most people may or may not know. That's the music band that played on all those Motown records. And of course, if you ever make it to Detroit, you got to go to the Motown Museum. They just renovated, by the way. And I recently took a tour. And there's nothing like being in Studio A, and they got the pictures of the Temptations and Diana Ross and the Supremes and Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye. Just as well known as some of this. You mentioned Stax, with some of the artists that they had, Otis Redding and Sam and Dave and all those. But just to be in Motown, just like I took a tour of Stax Records. When you're in Motown, you got to come and just check out the Motown Museum. It's very, very cool. And here's a cool thing: the day we went, they actually gave us a free copy of Berry Gordy's bio book. So I'm reading that now. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stories in there too. Yeah.
I didn't know they had renovated it. I had been there before, and you're right. It's a cool place, and I remember, Ron, because I was such a Supremes and Martha Reeves and Vandellas. I want, every young girl wanted to be that.
Yes.
And I remember as an adult going to that museum and being in that studio, and I took the picture like of Supremes, but tears started coming down because I said, this music meant so much to me growing up as a young girl and as a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you just mentioned her name. I couldn't remember. Martha Reeves. I can't believe I went absent with Martha Reeves. He told me a great story. She was actually a secretary at the Motown Studios before she was an artist. And I believe it was Marvin Gaye who said, you need to record this woman. So, it's interesting to hear stories like that. And, and there's a great story about how one of the vending machines in the certain slot was always a Baby Ruth bar because that was Stevie Wonder's favorite candy bar, and they didn't want to mess with him. So, yeah, there's all kinds of little stories that I got from Mr. Fakour, and I just recently reached out to him and told him that the documentary was out, and I got to talk to him for a few minutes. Another thrill on the phone. So, yeah, when you touch history like that, Bev, it's so cool, as you know. It's so cool.
It is so cool. And when you mentioned Martha Reeves, I remember, Ron, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas played at one of the casinos in Mississippi, and I was the MC.
Oh, wow.
And when I was talking about, Ron, how I grew up on Martha, we had a little group. And so when she and I introduced them, they came out, and then she said, where is that young lady that introduced me? And they said, there she is, Bev Johnson. So she brought me on the stage, and she says, do you know this? Ron, listen to this. She says, do you know this song? I said, it was Dancing in the Street. I said, yes, ma'am, I know. She gave me the microphone. I did Dancing in the Street with the Vandellas.
That is super cool. That is super cool. See, that's the kind of stuff you get to do in radio broadcasting that I just feel so blessed to be a part of this industry. But that's a memory you'll never forget. And then, I think we teased it. You might as well tell a little bit of your David Ruffin story while you're at it. Because that's a cool story too.
I think some of my listeners have heard it, but I always talk about when I was going. I love David Ruffin, and as a teenager, I said, "That's my boyfriend. That's my boyfriend." Well, when I got a chance to meet David and Eddie, they were touring, and they came to Memphis, and they came to the radio station, and I interviewed David and Eddie, and I told David, I said, "I loved you. You were my boyfriend. I loved you," and he was drinking coffee. Run out of a styrofoam cup, and on the cup he drew a picture of a man and a woman. He said, "Bev and David." I go like, "What?"
That's awesome.
And then that evening we were at a Club Royale, and they came to the club that night, and David called me on the stage and serenaded me.
That is so cool. Isn't that so cool. David Ruffin. I know you won't believe me. Yeah. Oh, come on now.
Yeah, that David was something. That was David. Ron, we're going to talk more. I will take this break. Don't you go anywhere.
Yes, ma'am.
Hold on, Ron, because I want to let our folks know how they can look at this documentary. So hold on, brother. Hold on. You know what we do in radio. We take a break. So hold on. I am talking with Ron Robinson a documentarian. His new documentary is called Radio Days, 101 Years of Radio. He has a good story. I saw some of it. It's good, y'all. Good. And if you may have a question or two, we'll see can you get you in at 833-535-9342, 833-535-9342. You're listening to the Bev Johnson Show on WDIA.
You're listening to Tennessee Radio Hall of Famer Bev Johnson on WDIA.
Good morning and welcome back to WDIA. I am talking with Mr. Ron Robinson, former broadcast personality and journalist, and now has a documentary that's called Radio Days with the Z, 101 Years of Radio, that chronicles the history of radio from the radio series to the emergence of rock and roll. And Ron, hold on, you should be able to hear our callers going to our phone line to talk to George. Hi, George.
Hey, Beverly Elaine Johnson. Can Ron hear me?
Yes, he can hear
George.
you. Go right ahead, George.
Ron, I first want to say congratulations. I love what you're doing with your expertise in the documentary and the movie business. Okay, you hear me, Ron?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
He's hearing you. Go on, George.
Now, what I want to say to you, Ron, I woke up one morning, I put my trumpet down from traveling with so many Stax people like Shirley Brown and others at Stax. And I stopped traveling in 1987 and I started preaching the gospel. However, I was at my office, church office, and the phone rang. I said, hello. And the guy says, I'm representing Smokey Robinson. Can I come to your church and do a movie?
Wow.
I started to hang up in the guy's face. I said, man, I don't have time for no Steve Harvey joke. I'm a preacher. I got to do my job. And my mother-in-law said, George, Mama Lena is my mother-in-law, Lena Palmer. Lena said, George, answer the phone. They want to do a movie at your church. I said, about what? Smokey Robinson want to come to your church. I said, when? He wanted to come July the 10th, 2016, and do a movie documentary run about his life.
That's awesome. That's
I
awesome.
said, well, what's that got to do with me? You got to sign insurance papers, George. He's a celebrity.
Yeah.
I said, oh, my God, is this real? Is this real? And Bev Smokey did a documentary at Rockville Vegas Baptist Church, and then I got all that call from WDIA. And you know who called me? Bobby O just said, George, why didn't you call the station? Why didn't you call the station and tell me you were going to do this? I signed a contract to not promote the documentary before it was released.
Wow.
I'm going to hang up now.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George. That's
Wow.
a great story. I love that.
Now, Ron, that's a story, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Wow. Hold on, Ron. We'll get our next caller. Hi, Unforgetful.
Hey, Ms. Johnson. I would like to ask a question to your guest dealing with the music. Can you tell me which one came first, jazz or blues?
Well,
You want to know what came first, jazz or blues?
Oh, I would say blues, but that's just
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll ask Ron
Yeah.
that question.
Yeah,
Which
I
came
think
first,
blues,
jazz,
yeah.
and see if he knows.
Yeah. And the next question about radio back in the past, I was so fascinated about these shows, like you just mentioned, the Greenhorn, the Dark Shadow, and all these shows, War of the World. You know, today we're looking at broadcast. That's the way they change it. And I was wondering, why is it that the music on radio is so different from the new music back in the past? Because the 70s, the 60s, it was wonderful because they had bands, great bands that could play music. But today, it seems like everything gone to this digital stuff. They just replacing everything with machines.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, could he go all the way back to the big band area when things were like the Duke Ellingtons and the big band back then when radio was really popular? The music was really popular.
Okay.
It wasn't such things as DJs and all that. It was basically announcers just doing a show like, like you were talking about, green corners and stuff, and the big band when they had brass and all the stuff that was so wonderful back then.
Yeah.
But now the day has changed, like it's just an individual thing, like a singer. You know, without the music, you know, there really ain't no good singers out there.
All right, we'll ask that question, Unforgetful. Thank you, Unforgetful. Ron, Unforgetful has a lot of things.
Yeah, no, yeah, I don't want to sound like get off my lawn guy, but I think there was music that did plateau, and I kind of agree with him that the music that, and no disrespect to current artists, you know, they're doing their thing, but I think at a certain point, he was right. There was a lot of diversity. There was a lot of different people from different walks of life making music, and you know, it all stems from what you know. And there's so many cultures in this country that I agree. I don't think it's as diverse as it once was, and I don't know. That's just me. So, but yeah, I think there's something to that. But the big band era, you know, not too long ago, I went over an old friend's house, and they're a big Frank Sinatra fan, and we were listening to some of those old recordings that he did back in the day, and the big band era. That was another era that kind of got glossed over a little bit, especially to young people now. Yeah. It's interesting, but music has evolved.
It has, Ron, and it's a different day. We have all this technology, and you don't need the big bands and all that. They can do it in one little thing.
Yeah, in one little computer. Yeah. Well, you can attest to how technology has made radio editing easier, right?
Oh, brother, you know I can't run. I tell people that when I started radio. Do they remember the 45s and the 33s? That's what I was playing, 45s and 33s. Yeah. And then you went from the vinyl, and then you went to the reel to reel, then it's the cart machine. Oh, my goodness. I've seen it all, Ron.
And the reel to reel, I mean, that's what I'm kind of talking about is like if you got a phone call back in the day, you'd have to record it on reel and say somebody swore, you'd have to cut the reel, so get rid of that swear word. So it's time consuming. It's not just like hitting record and then playing it back right after. It was the grind was hard.
Ron, it was hard. And when you say, oh my goodness, Ron, you brought me back. It's when the reel to reel, and you're right, because you had to edit, and remember you had to splice, and you get that razor blade, and you
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I was a good splicer. I could put that together.
Right on. But yeah, that's just an example of how radio has changed from the inside and outside. So we listen to it differently and we produce it differently, to be sure.
So Ron, in the documentary, you said it's a 5-part docuseries.
Yes, ma'am.
History of radio, and you start 1920. Wow,
yeah, 1920. Yeah, well, another interesting character is Father Charles Coughlin, who was a Catholic priest in the Detroit area, and he was arguably the first celebrity that was spawned from radio. He was in 1923 he hit the airwaves of WJR, another Detroit legendary radio station, to protest a cross that was put in the church's yard, and that's why he started his sermons on the radio. But over the years, he developed a huge following. I think 23 to 30 million people would tune into his show every week, which, can you imagine anybody turning in 30 million in one thing now?
I know. Wow.
But over the course of his career, he became more openly anti-Semitic, became a Hitler apologist, and he became a very polarizing figure. And It's an interesting story because you have a following, and then your opinions change, and then he becomes an interesting character. But I tell his story, and then I move on to the 20s and 30s, and your caller mentioned War of the Worlds, probably the single most known about popular radio serial in radio history because of what was made of it. It was Martians were landing, very spectacular story. And that's why radio to me is so special, Bev, is because that's an example of what radio really does well. And that's the theater of the mind. There's no videos to tell you how you think or what you should be thinking. It's all someone's listening, and then they create the images in their mind. And that's why I think radio is, to me, even to this day, the best medium out there.
Yeah, it is. It is, Ron. So tell our listeners how they can see this documentary, Radio Dayz, 101 Years of Radio.
Well, there's a couple different ways. I have, this is the first time I've entered a documentary into a company, and the company's called Film Hub, and their deal is they help filmmakers get their work out there. And so I've signed up for them, and I'm kind of at the mercy of streaming services. So it's right now it's licensed by a couple different streaming services. There's a streaming service called Reveal, which is Reveel. So Reveal is a little bit misspelled. It's Reveel, and that's a streaming service that's dedicated to independent filmmakers, and I'm very proud to be on that platform. Look for this on Tubi, which some of your listeners probably know about Tubi. And then if you just can't wait, you got to see it. There's a link at my website, which is ronrobinsonstudios.com, which is my name, Ron Robinson, Studios, STUDIOS.com, ronrobinsonstudios.com. I have a documentaries tab, and once you click on that documentaries, the first thing is Radio Dayz the movie. You click on that, and it'll take you to a link where you can rent it or own it from the website. So right now that's what I'm looking at, and it's hard out there for an independent filmmaker, you know.
Yes, it is very hard, but what I saw, Ron, I think you've done an excellent job, and I was just so amazed at the people you were talking to, and just listening to their stories.
Yes, ma'am.
And it just brought me back, as a kid and as a teenager, listening to radio.
Yes, there's nothing like it. It's theater of the mind, as I mentioned. So, and again, I can't thank you enough for being a part of it. And I think when people watch this, they're gonna be educated. They're gonna be entertained. But there are also some education in there. And, that was a fun part about it. You asked early in the phone call, something I got out of it is as a historian, there's a lot of stuff that I learned as I was making this film. And I couldn't be more proud of it. And I say this to people, take myself out of the equation. You got to watch this. It's good because of all the people that did sit down with me. And so that's why I'm thankful. Because there's over 40 radio personalities / historians that I talk to that tell the story. And when you watch a documentary, there might be 8 or 10 people. I interviewed. Yeah. My first interview was back in 2014, so it literally took me 9 years to make this docuseries.
Wow. But you stuck with it, brother. You stuck with it.
Yes, ma'am. So.
And I just thank you because you didn't have to ask me. You didn't have to ask Bobby OJ to do the interview. Thank you just for thinking about us and thinking about this legendary radio station, WDIA.
Well, again, I am honored and tickled to be on your show and these airwaves. WDIA, as a radio historian, is it's a first, and it's the goodwill station, if you will. So I love it.
Yes, it is. And Ron, one more time, give our listeners your website.
It's ronrobinsonstudios.com. And like I said at the top, there's a documentaries tab. You click on that. Radio Dayz the movie is right underneath that. And in addition to having a link to where you can rent and own it, there's several different trailers. I got 5 different trailers, one for each episode. But I also got cuts from quite a few people that I sat down with, including the legendary Bev Johnson, where in the clip on the website, she talks about how music changed from the 1960s to the 1970s. So,
thank you, Ron. And I tell my listeners, it's exciting, and I learned a whole lot. Thank you for doing this, Ron.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Bev.
And you are so welcome. And Ron, when I come that way, I'm going to call you.
You better. I'll take you out to dinner. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
When I head that way for Ann Arbor and Detroit, I'm going to call you, brother. And I got to go, as you said, to the new renovated Motown Museum.
Yes. And we got a football team's worth watching now too. I don't know if you heard.
Oh. Hey, brother, I tell my listeners, I am a Detroit Lions fan. Do you hear me, Ron?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you. Thank you,
Bev.
Ron Robinson. I appreciate you. Have a good evening, and they'll have a fabulous weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Bev. Thank you for having me on. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.